Well, what a few days that has been. But we are back here on All for Women's Football for the trial of the century. Forget OJ Simpson, forget Sam Kerr. Today, we are putting women's football on trial. Is it doing all the right things? Are they pushing it too much into men's football? Do people just need to stop being insecure? I don't know. Let's go into it. We'll find out on the other side of this. Hello, welcome back. It is a pleasure to be back on what is only our second show of 2025. It feels a little bit like we're slacking. We might need to throw a few more on, but we are back. We've got some great people joining us here in the viewers gallery whilst women's football goes on trial. So who have we got? Well, let's have a little look. First of all, we've got Freya, who has obviously done a fair amount of writing herself. Freya, how are you doing? Lovely to have you back again.
Yeah, doing well, thank you. Very, very happy to be back, albeit the topic that we're gonna have to discuss.
Yes, it's gonna be a very interesting one. I'm quite looking forward to getting into it. Also, talking about writing, we thought we'd go and get ourselves a chap journalist in too. And what a legend we got in. It is, of course, Rob, who tells us all about all things Chelsea, amongst other things. How are you doing?
Very good, Barry, and good to see you again as well.
Lovely to have you back. Lovely to have you back. And just over there in the corner is a good old friend of mine, but more than that, an excellent footballer who plays for London Seaward in Division 1 South East. It is Beatrice Rogers. How are you doing? Oh, she's muted, so she's going to try that one again. There you go. Try again.
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very good. Thank you. Lovely to have you back on the show. So, listen, it has been a bit of a mad 4 days. Little did we know that TalkSport beginning their conversation about the Mission 150 idea for Manchester United to go on and have Project 21 and Project 1. Little did we know that was going to cause quite the drama that it did. And it was an interesting one because Alan Brazil's opinion wasn't actually the thing that anybody that was retweeting that seemed to have a problem with. The actual drama was that he straight up said, nobody cares. And we all sat there and said, well, that's not true. We know it's not true because I was at an FA Cup final that had that many people in it. I mean, it looked like they cared. I mean, I don't think they were all there just hoping they could get some scram from Wembley Stadium. So it seemed a little bit wrong of Alan Brazil to say that. But amazingly, out it goes, this being mentioned. And before you know it, it was jumped on. Now, listen, Twitter is not a place where I spend my life. It's not really somewhere where personally I'm looking for a massive following. In fact, every time on All for United we've been over there and Connor tells everybody to follow them, I always say, don't bother following me. I've got nothing worth saying. It's not worth it. Just leave me alone. But I did put something out there with my 600 odd followers. It wasn't very many because I'm not after them. And I'm used to getting maybe at best, occasionally I might get 30 likes and I'm like, oh, isn't that nice? I got 904,000 views and 9,386 likes purely by telling people to just ignore something they don't like and switch over to a different channel. Now, I did upset all the Homes Under the Hammers fans, and I do feel like I need to just take a moment to apologise to Homes Under the Hammer. I should never, ever have taken your name in vain. But here we are. So we have put women's football in the dock, and I don't want this to be a bashing on the people that bashed us because two wrongs don't make a right, but there were a lot of points made in those tweets that were sent to me that I really wanted to get through. So that's my plan, is that we're going to run through some of these ideas, some of the things that people are mentioning, and we're going to see whether or not we think these are valid concerns, whether or not they're born from fake news, where it might be. So that's where we're going to go. But we're going to kick off with a very quick fire question. Freya, do you care about women's football?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
A little bit.
B, do you care?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, cares a lot. And Rob, do you care?
Yes, a
So
lot.
unbelievably, there's 4 people here who definitely care. And even though there's only 39 people watching, that's 43 people, which is 43 more than nobody. So that's the first one dealt with. We do have people that care. So lots of topics that I want to bring up. Please do get involved in the chat when we bring these up. So the first one is this: airtime compared to men. Now, I had some, I have to call them insecure at this point, because they were really upset about how much airtime is being given to women's football. Now, I actually had a look. This is the level that I will go to at the week from Friday to Friday. And I think the person that I tweeted, I think I worked out there was 72 and a half hours of football, which was men's football, in that week. And there was 1.5 hours of women's football, one match, which was going to be Man City Liverpool in the evening. I mean, it doesn't feel like they're not able to ignore it. So the tweet I put out, Freya, was very simple. Did you agree with it? Do you not think that there is enough football to be watched, that whatever channel it's on, these people should be able to access men's football if they want to, and not be too concerned about the odd match that's being put on by Sky or whatever?
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's, if you look at Sky as a package, and I've got it, so I feel I'm quite familiar with it, but there's over 900 channels. I'm sure for those 90 minutes, give or take an extra bit of 20, 30 minutes, you can find something else to watch on another one of those channels if that's not your thing. However, when it's the men's FA Cup, when it's, any of the competition, Premier League, it's all over the channels, and I just go, football's on. I don't make a thing of it to say, look at those men shoving their matches down our throats again. It's just, the men's football is on, the women's football is on. It doesn't make the slightest difference. When the golf's on, the tennis is on, if you don't want to watch it, there's literally nothing stopping you. There isn't a lock on the screen saying you need to watch it or else. It's an option. And in 2025, options are fantastic. And if you are paying for those packages, you get all of these options. And it's not as if they've said, we're not going to put the men's Premier League on because of this women's game, because the majority of the time, the games aren't even on at the same time, unless it's been moved about. So there's literally no point and no, concrete evidence behind people saying, it's men's football or women's football. No, we coexist. And for the majority, we do it quite beautifully. So, yeah, I don't see why that argument was even an issue.
No, I mean, I did think it was right up there with whinging that the sky is blue when it clearly is. But maybe it was grey that particular day for them. B, you play football, you watch football, you consume it. I know that you, for some reason, spend a lot of time around Arsenal women, but clearly you like football. I'm very much the same. If football's on and it's on, it's there. You just watch it. I've never scrolled through and gone, oh my God, it's Aberdeen against Rangers. Why have we got the SPL on? Or how has the Bundesliga made it onto my screen? What's gone on here? You just sit there and go, I don't want to watch this. I'll find something else. Just like I do when I go past the horse racing, when I go past the equestrian. I quite like the jumping. But when it comes to watching them do the dressage and their little dance, kill me now. I'm not interested. Why is it such an issue? There's not enough women's football on TV for me. I think there should be more. Why do you think it was such an issue for some of these people that actually it feels like to them there's too much airtime, too much football on TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great question. And I think there might be so many possible answers to that, why people get so insecure about women's football being on the TV and in the media. I have no idea. It baffles me, but it's definitely something there's been a long history of in the women's game, dating back to like 1921, I think it was, when the women's game was banned. I think it's always been an issue, and I don't understand it. I have no idea.
No, I don't blame you. I think, honestly, that is the answer, because I didn't understand it at all, and I certainly didn't understand that reaction. But Rob, for you, I mean, that's an unbelievable, and that was just Sky Sports, to be fair. I hadn't looked on the likes of TNT and other places. There was certainly, I think TNT, they seem to have the A-League on, so there's often a few more games that are on theirs. But I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? To sit there and go, it's too much airtime when actually you've got 71 whole hours more of men's football to choose from, whereas women's football, which even if they did have all of their games, is only 6 games a weekend, is a bit mad.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest gripe with it, and this is what I said, this is the message, that it's always women's football that seems to be hit by the stick of that it's being forced down the throat. There's never any other sport. Now, personally, I don't really care about American football, but for the last week, every time I've turned something on, I've heard at least one reference to Super Bowl. And even this morning when I was told it was like so and so happened in the Super Bowl overnight, I was thinking, I don't care, but there's people out there that do care. In a couple of weeks' time, Formula One will come back. I can watch it if it's on, but I wouldn't exactly say I'm an avid fan of it. In a few months' time, Wimbledon will be the talk of the town. You won't be able to turn on, the BBC without hearing some reference to it in something, whether it is even in programming that's relevant. And it's always women's football that we say it just gets shoved down the throat. It is not. It's, if anything, I'd argue, and the other stupid one that I really hate, and I get this from a journalist point of view, is people saying, oh, well, we're in a transfer window, and I hear that, Chelsea have made a world record signing, and I look onto it thinking it's going to be an exciting player, and it's a player for the women's team, and I'm sat there thinking, yes, well, the amount of media you consume nowadays, if you're honestly that, you lack the brain cells enough to realise that if there was a story about the men making world record signing, it also would have got airtime, because shock horror, every single thing about transfers nowadays is documented from black to white, from beginning to end, for better or for worse. You would have heard about it. It's not suddenly, we're not talking about sort of the 60s, for example, where clubs could go ahead and sign a player without knowing. Nowadays, every ins and out of every single transfer. And if you're stupid enough to suddenly think a team has circumvented that, then quite frankly, there's no point you having those notifications on in the first place. If you're using them to get selectively outraged about things, or like goal notifications, someone the other day said to me, or to me about yesterday's Chelsea weeks ago, they said, oh, I got really confused because there was a goal notification and we went out the FA Cup on Saturday evening. I was like, congratulations, you knew we went out the FA Cup. It does not take a genius to tell you, therefore, the goal notification is not for you. And we get it for some of the Chelsea youth games. You don't even get it on when you get it on the men's side, the under 21 and the under 18 games on there. And people are like, I see the notifications for games that are on. And I think, oh, the men aren't playing till later. And I'm like, yes, there are many teams that are covered by it. And actually, I'd rather see more of that coverage. But yeah, as someone said, you can find a match or like Sky Sports News is a 90% male sport. I completely agree. It does. It's one of those things that like vexes me. The amount and lack of ability to actually rewatch women's games or sort of get decent highlights packages. And I have to give great credit to my friend Adam Salter, who's doing a sort of an Arsenal women's archive and actually picking up the history and going back to, the beginning of sort of the late 90s and bringing it up to speed and updating it on the Wikipedias, finding the highlights packages. Because he sent me one the other day of a game and I was like, well, I remember watching that live and I remember maybe for a couple of days afterwards seeing the goals. But after that, the highlights have just disappeared. And trying to find highlights of, games that were on back in the day when it was BT covering the WSL, apart from 1 or 2 games, it is non-existent out there. And yeah, exactly, the women's football show. Like, I mean, that's my own. I would love to see that get the treatment the Match of the Day 2 is now getting, Match of the Day is now getting, where it gets re-shown at a better time, and it gets re-shown at a better time from an audience point of view. I mean, again, I'll sort of put myself in a certain vintage here. I used to love every single week. I don't follow the leagues, but I used to love every week. I would watch Bundesliga highlights. I'd record it the night before, and I'd watch it, and I'd get up and watch it before school in the morning. And that's how I got to know a lot of the Bundesliga. I'd watch Revista de la Liga with Scott Minto and Guillem Balaguer and, some of the great pundits on there. I'd watch the old, I'm not quite old enough to remember the old Italia football show, but I know my dad, frequently holds that as the pinnacle of football highlights with, Jade Richardson. And, the same, there's a League One equivalent show that used to be on TNT, that used to be on TNT and BT. And that's how you get to know these other leagues. And I'd actually love, I'd love a broadcaster. I think there's a massive gap to actually do that with the European leagues, because you see, Barcelona, you see Real Madrid, you see Lyon, you see PSG, you see maybe Roma or Juve, but there's so much more out there and there's such a wider sphere. And the same with like non-league coverage in England. Like, aside for a few very, very good accounts of what they do, the FA themselves need to be better at promoting that, whether it's a case of making results available or having a platform available for it and actually having the information out there. They are letting people down because there is a way you can do it. And people are talking about, the opposite way on the United men's app. That doesn't surprise me, because I've been told the Chelsea app is a bit of a unique beast in this regard. And one thing I will give, I've been extremely critical at times about Chelsea. Again, I'm extremely critical at times, but one thing they've done very, very well in the last few years is actually put the women's team on a pedestal and put the information on the app, put the highlights on there, make things available, make press conferences available, and shock horror, it's increasing the interest in it.
Absolutely that. I mean, so many things for people to say there, but I do want to, I'm going to diverge immediately on what you just said there, because that was one of the things that people would say, oh, the notifications. When the notifications are popping up, and then I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's nothing to do with Manchester United men, or that's nothing to do with Arsenal men. I'm like, what is it? Or I get excited because I see that it's saying Manchester City against Arsenal. And like you just said, where's the brain cells? You know Man City aren't playing Arsenal this weekend because it would be on Sky. So why are you getting yourself so excited about it? But equally, is it not a valid point? Because I actually think it is. If you don't want it, should you not be able to have specific notifications within the apps? So places like Sky Sports, for example, they will let you choose who your football team is. But if you've got notifications on, I mean, to me, that seems actually quite reasonable that you could choose which matches, which clubs you get notifications from, which competitions maybe. That seems like a reasonable thing to ask for, because in the same way as I'm really not too interested in what's going on in Serie A or in League, and yeah, I'm not really too fussed. I only just about care about the Premier League. I don't know why I'd care about the top league anywhere else in the world. So that seems like a reasonable thing to ask for, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. If someone doesn't want to see it, the notification should have an option for you to turn it off for the women's. But on the other hand, I think the fact that maybe you're getting exposed to both is probably quite good for the women's game. It is probably increasing the representation. And I do appreciate that not everyone wants to see it. And it probably is right that they bring in an option for you not to see it if you don't want to. But at the same time, it is probably doing some good to increase the representation of the game.
Which I agree with. And I wouldn't advocate for taking it off entirely. I mean, just about the notifications, because I mean, Freya, as they were saying, someone going, oh, I have to scroll past the WSL on Sky Sports to get to the Championship. I'm like, you absolutely don't. And I proved that by looking for the Women's FA Cup, and I listed it on my tweet. I think I had to go through to find out the Women's FA Cup, the Men's FA Cup, the Championship, League One, League Two, Scottish Division 1, Scottish Division 2, Scottish Championship, Scottish Cup, an international that wasn't kicking off till half 11 because the two teams that were playing were so far away from England. It was 9 leagues before I finally got to the WSL. And apart from feeling just ever so slightly, sorry, not the WSL, the Women's FA Cup, and despite the fact that, you know, that was quite a lot, and feeling a little bit annoyed that actually I had to scroll for so long to find something that I felt was probably the second most important competition going on that weekend, I didn't just moan about it. I just got on with it, because you can scroll past these things. I was very capable. It has the ability to expand it if you want to see the scores. If you don't, you just, look at that, they're gone. Hey, it seems quite easy. Freya, are people just lazy?
Yeah, but we know that. But no, you're absolutely right. Like the different apps that we've all got preferred apps that we use, right? So I know you mentioned Sky Sports there. I quite like OneFootball as well, because you can follow the different leagues and competitions that you like, and you literally you have to opt in, you have to star that, so you don't get everything. In fact, I don't think you get anything unless you physically click, right, I want this league, I want that game, I want this team. So it can be done, and even on BBC Sport, because you're right, that drives us crazy when you've got to scroll through all these leagues. But what you can then do is search for the league that you want. And that's what I'm starting to have to do, and just typing in the Super League or the Championship or whatever I want, because there are so much, and there's just so much to sift through. But again, it's how far do you want to hide women's football under the men's? Is there a better way to do it? Is it, I mean, that's another kind of worms if you say rank of importance, but in competition-wise, an FA Cup is probably more important in a sense than third division. I don't know, but yeah, there's got to be a better way to do it. But the people who care will find a way, and they've got a way to find their information out.
I think you're right. I absolutely do think you're right. Another thing that was mentioned when they're talking about too much airtime, this blew my mind. This might just be me, so I'm going to put it out to what I consider to be three very sensible people, just to work out whether or not I need to give my head a wobble, because it seemed a little bit odd. But they seemed very surprised that on Sky Sports News they might report what's happening in women's football, and they seemed very, very angry at anything that wasn't men's football. And Rob, I'll come to you first on this one. Why are they so shocked when it's mentioned that, I don't know, Chelsea have beaten Manchester United 6-0, or that Manchester United have beaten Chelsea in the FA Cup semi-final? When that comes in, these are big results. And so when you're having those situations, you want that on Sky Sports News. Now, I'm with them insofar as when I'm sitting there watching the news, or I've got it on in the background, and then all of a sudden they start talking about the cricket, instantly my head just goes, I don't care about this. I don't want to know anything about the cricket. And then I use this magic thing called a remote control, and it's gone. And I never have to worry about it again. I can mute it. I can stick some music on and just have it going on, so I just see the ticker. Like, there's so many things I could do. Why do you think it's such a surprise for these people that airtime is given on a news channel or on a website? Because the whole thing kicks off because of Shaban sticking out the whole statement rather than just sticking to the little bit that would have kept Alan Brazil happy.
I mean, the honest answer to that is people are thick. If I'm, I'm just being blunt about it. But what really irritated me about the situation with Shaban was that it wasn't as if she was saying something that was actually her opinion. She was saying what the statement factually says. Whether people liked it or not, it was part of the thing. It wasn't as if she suddenly added this in and tacked it on. If that was the case, I wouldn't necessarily agree with people, but I'd understand why they're saying it. But people seem to have forgotten that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. And I've said this about a lot of things recently. You can go ahead and say what you like. It doesn't mean people have to listen to you. And it doesn't mean people are going to say that, yes, you can get away with that or turn a blind eye to it. Now, I think that in terms of stuff like that, it is just a case of a lack of common sense and a lack of changing, the channel or changing X, Y, and Z. I mean, yeah, I agree on that on social media. I think social media is a really, and someone I spoke to afterwards gave a really, really good explanation on this. They sort of said, social media has just embellished the ability of people to feel like they can empower themselves by being bigoted, by being offensive, because they can put themselves in an echo chamber where everyone just repeats their opinion and says it's brilliant and says, you're 100% spot on. And I said it in my own quote tree. The saddest thing for me isn't the fact Alan Brazil said it. I mean, the fact that it comes from Alan Brazil sadly doesn't really shock me. But the two saddest things that came out of it was, number one, he later on tried to cover it by saying his granddaughter plays it and she goes and watches it. You clearly don't care about that, and that's lip service. And number two, it would have been the number of people sat there saying, well done, Alan, well done on putting her in her place, as if, being rude and obnoxious to someone on live radio for something they said was factual was some sort of achievement.
No, absolutely. I thought it was outrageous, actually, the way that he chose to speak about it. But there we go. Listen, let's see some of what we've got here. This was mentioned, JJ. I put this in the thread about how many people used to watch women's football before they banned it in 1921, and this is exactly the point that I was trying to get in there. This is what we was talking about there with the notifications. Well done. And yes, the biggest gripe is that they don't appreciate how the 50-year ban has stifled the growth of women's football. And that kind of leads me on to my next point. I'm just going to throw this out. I'm not sure what you're saying here, Connor, but you can't be calling me lazy. I'm surely, of all the time, I really hope that's not, and you're just shocked at my brilliant question asking there, because that's gonna irk me otherwise. So this one, B, I'm going to come to you about this because you brought this part of it up. One of the things that was mentioned was that the airtime is too much for the quality of what it is. So I'm going to quote now what somebody said. Putting women's football on the TV is like putting the under-13s or the dog and duck versus the rusty gun. Now, not my words, but this is how some people look at it. They look at women's football and they don't see it as an actual sport. They see it as something to be ridiculed, something to be laughed at, which you don't get. You don't get that. Like the women's Ashes have been on. I haven't seen too much around Twitter about the quality of the cricket in that. It just seems to be accepted. People go to watch tennis, and the men's final being the day after the women's final, they set it out. You're never sitting there going, oh my God, there's nobody watching the women's final in tennis. What's happening here? People still want to see it because the quality is good. So I come to you as a player and a player at tier 4 for this one. Isn't it about time that people accepted the football for what it is and accept the fact that, no, it's not Premier League level. Of course it's not, because there's a great big whacking 50-year gap where these people have had money pumped into it. It's their full-time job for a start, so they're doing it all the time with facilities and playing against teams that have forced them to be better, with money that's had them the opportunity to get players in and to do all of those sorts of things. Is there a bit there that people just need to accept it for the game that it is, rather than constantly trying to compare it with where the men's game is now, because they're not comparable in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the 50-year ban aside, I think they're two very different sports. As someone who's played both boys and girls football, I think they're incomparable. It's like comparing rugby to hockey. Like, they're not the same sport, and the comparison's a waste of time. The style of play is completely different. So, yeah, it winds me up whenever I hear people saying that women's football's not as good as men, because I think that comparison's pointless because they're so drastically different from each other. But yeah, you have to take into account the lack of support and funding. Like, if the game hadn't been banned for that long, I think it would be in such a different place to where it is now. And I think that's definitely something that has to be at least thought of when this conversation comes around.
I think so. And JJ agreeing here about the tennis is one of the best examples. It's gone for its own battles when it comes to gender, but no one complains if there's a WTA tournament airing over ATP. I completely agree with that. So yeah, very interesting. We'll be coming back to tennis later when we talk about something else. So that will be there. But Freya, equally to you as well. Now, we watch it. We're consumers of this. I mean, B is as well, but she's specifically within there through playing. I am consistently finding myself enjoying myself more within the world of women's football and within what I watch in women's football than I am with them. I am so disillusioned with men's football right now. I genuinely believe it needs an implosion. It needs all of the money to be taken out of it for it all to go wrong, the sponsorship deals to go wrong, and for grassroots football, effectively, everything from League One and below to be football in this country again. Because for me, that's what women's football represents. It's football like it used to be. It's football for sport. It's not, because of the fact the money's not there, entirely about this is going to be a job where everybody's talking about Marcus Rashford and everything that's been happening over there. The amount of money that people are getting, it's too easy to then say, well, they're just going to phone that position in. Over here in women's football, it's proper football. It's football as it should be. You're watching two teams go at it. Yeah, we saw Man United and Wolves at the weekend, and Man United didn't give Wolves a sniff. But then you look at Rugby Borough, and they did incredibly well for 84 minutes and very nearly got themselves a result. So I actually prefer it. I get there's going to be loads that don't, but isn't this exactly what we're talking about? You watch what you enjoy, and what you don't enjoy, you just leave to other people to watch if they want to.
And that's the thing, it comes back to choice again, doesn't it? Because we know how fantastic women's football is. And it's almost, the more we talk about it and the more we try and say, watch the championship because of how phenomenal it is, women's championship, watch the Women's Super League. How do these people expect us to grow if people aren't watching, if people aren't going to see games live? I saw one person say about the Wolves United match. They said everyone was saying how brilliant it was and the atmosphere and the attendances, and it was sold out, wasn't it? And someone commented underneath going, yeah, but the tickets were either free or a $5, so does it really count? And it's like, but how do you how can you realize that at this moment in time, the women's game isn't about those ticket prices? Because one, it would then cut off a lot of people because we get a lot of families coming, don't we? But also, on a different point, you look at the ticket prices in men's football, And you look at, well, is the quality of some men's football, as you were saying, does that reflect then the ticket price as well? So that's another conversation. And we want the sport to grow in the best possible way. Why can't we give people the opportunity to actually do that? Because it seems every time we tweet about it or try and show how fantastic it is, for every one person doing that, there's 100 saying it's crap, it shouldn't be a thing, women's football's rubbish, why is it on the telly, why are you ramming it down my throat? So it's almost as if you're fighting against a brick wall, and people like us, like, we're not going to stop talking about it. Of course we're not. We're going to shout even louder. But for a lot of people, it maybe could hold them back, couldn't it? So it's just understanding women's football, as B said, it's its own thing. Let us grow. Let us do that. And it just, it's baffling that people are still trying to compare them when you're right, you can't compare them.
It is a bit of a mad one. And Rob, I want you to say your point about what we were just talking about there as well. But we're also going to pop this into another argument that's been thrown forward, which is that it's over-promoted. Now, I can remember, because I'm old enough to remember, the darts when it was on the Circus Tavern. Phil Taylor, Dennis Priestley used to be the best people playing it. People used to whinge at Dennis Priestley because he was incredibly slow. And Phil Taylor was obviously the Chelsea of women's football at that point. And he was just racing about, absolutely battering everybody. And it started going on to Sky Sports. And they pushed it more and more and more and more. And now all of a sudden it's at Alexandra Palace, which is a way bigger place than the Circus Tavern ever was. It's a massive deal. People go there every year. They called it Dartsmas, whatever that was, on Sky Sports this year. It was absolutely atrocious. Whoever did that needed to be sacked, that's for sure, because that person was absolutely half a bottle of Jack Daniels deep when he decided that one. But as they're having this conversation, darts was absolutely thrown. And it's this big, massive entity that is the darts now, only came because they took this game, which is just throwing things at a board, and decided to make people watch it. Now, there is an element, therefore, that is ramming it down people's throats because you're making it visible. But as a journalist, that's our job, isn't it? To go out there, things out there for people to then choose whether they want to watch it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use a recent example, actually, with this that has really actually warmed my heart. With I write for a platform by my friend Cy Phillips. Traditionally, most of it has been Chelsea men. I did an article last week on Chelsea women and how they operate, and I'm doing a subsequent one on Kira Walsh. The amount of positive responses we got from people saying, I'd love to hear more of this, I want to hear more of this, I want to hear more quality content on the women's game, was fantastic. I think the Cutback are doing it brilliantly as well, because they're putting out quality content on the women's game. I think there are some amazing content creators on social media that are putting out quality content on it. Now, to me, people seem to dislike. I would much rather the fact the content is going the right way, of quality content from genuine, passionate fans. If that is becoming more commonplace, I'd much rather that than the utter nonsense and the stake-filled absolute carp that you see plastered all over social media platforms now. And, the stupid one-upmanship, the my dad is bigger than yours playground nonsense. I mean, obviously there's an element of it, and Bish, I'd like to ask you about this from like a fan point of view. Like, obviously, I think banter is sort of a big thing, and the women's game, people sort of talk about it from a sort of a fan point of view, from a player point of view, but also from a fan point of view, as I know you also follow Arsenal. Like, how important do you think that element actually is? And do you think it's one of those things, because people try and almost like sanitize it at times, it is harming the growth?
What were you asking? The importance of banter, sorry?
Yeah, well, like, it's obviously like rivalry and banter and stuff. I think, obviously, we all agree there's a level that, there's a level where the line you shouldn't cross and stuff. But in terms of a growth point of view, both as a player, but also from a fan point of view, do you agree that the fact people try and sanitize it, I think at times, is holding things back? Because I saw people, for example, complaining yesterday, Lucy Hope at the Chelsea match, for example, she stuck two fingers up at the crowd at one point due to a decision going against her. She got roundly booed all game and, spent the entire game being battered about by Maria Riz. She gave a penalty away. I'm sure ultimately that, water off a duck's back for her, she's used to it as a player, but I'm much sure she'd rather play in an environment where actually she felt there was atmosphere and, a level of animosity. I'm not saying, blatant hatred, but a level of animosity and a level of experience for it than, playing in complete silence or playing with people just, innocently applauding absolutely everything.
Yeah, I mean, even at the level I'm playing at, there's rivalries between teams, there's the local derbies, there's all of that at this level. And I think that that is part of the game, and that's an important part of football and kind of what makes it interesting and exciting as a fan, but also sometimes as a player. I do, however, think that maybe the men's football's taken that a step too far, and it's no longer a nice environment for families to go watch and that kind of stuff, which is where the women's game's maybe a bit nicer. But yeah, I think that there's still a place for rivalries and that kind of thing in the women's game.
Yeah, it's good. It's sort of good to hear that from a like player point of view. Because again, I've spoken to players at like Chelsea, and they've said like openly, Lauren James, for instance, I'll go out and say she loves playing Arsenal because she knows she's going to get, she knows it, and she says, I was warming up in front of them, they're giving me all the cheers, and then later on I get to go and shut them up. And she says, this is the best feeling in the world for a player when you get to go and do that. And I've got no doubt, I've no doubt, for example, last year when Rachel Williams scored against Chelsea in the cup after some of, the more colourful chants that she gets, she felt the same. There are players across sort of all levels of it, I think. And I agree with the point on men's football. I think men's football has gone the other way far too much. It's become toxic in that it's just people like being stupidly offensive and needlessly offensive. And like that's where I don't want the women's game to go. That's my concern, is that people are going to start taking the idea of promoting the women's game and taking it to a negative sense of that they're using it to promote by just relentlessly bashing other players, or like making appalling comments about X, Y, and Z. And I'll go ahead and say I've seen Chelsea fans make comments about other players and stuff, and about sort of sexuality and things like that are just utterly appalling. And I flat out will call people out on it. But I do worry that that's the way things are, could go if the wrong sort of crowd start promoting it.
Certainly does feel that way. I mean, B, when you get to the over promotion side of things, I mean, we've seen lots of things happen on Twitter, and I've made it my business to go around and try and follow as many women's football teams up and down the pyramid as I possibly can on Twitter specifically, so I can see what's going on. It's the best way of getting the information. Once you get out of the WSL and to a degree the Championship, finding information about what's going on in the WNL and below is a little bit like trying to find the remains of rocking horse manure, because it's not the easiest thing to find. So what do you think about the overpromotion? Because at the higher level, I could kind of see why people are thinking there's a lot of promotion on this at the moment. But it comes down to what Freya and I said earlier, doesn't it? It's just choice. If you don't like it, nobody is actually forcing you to watch it. You're just saying that you are. You don't have to. There's 933 other channels to choose from, or you could just go outside and stroke some grass.
Yeah, I mean, exactly like you said, there's freedom of choice. People can choose not to listen to it. But I wouldn't even describe it as over promotion. I think there needs to be more promotion. When I was growing up, being like an aspiring footballer like I was, there was practically no representation of the women's game in the media. And therefore I grew up as a young girl with no female football role models because I just didn't see it. So the promotion of the game that's happening is brilliant, because then the young girls growing up can see more people playing, see that it's a route for them, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think there should be more promotion of the women's game, if I'm being honest. I think there's not enough at the moment. And like you said, if people don't want to see it, they don't have to see it. They can just turn it off, switch off the channel, whatever. It's all choice.
It's really not a hard thing to do. Freya, it's interesting because B mentions that there as being a young girl watching the sport and seeing it grow over the course of the last few years specifically. But one of the things that was actually said to me is it's aimed at, try to remember this correctly, it's aimed at football fans specifically. They're aiming at the wrong crowd, and they said it should be aimed at young girls who they're trying to get into the sport. So, I mean, B's obviously just made a very clear point there. That's not quite the case. But it's not just young girls that they're going to want to get, is it? I mean, if we started turning up at football matches and it was like a Justin Bieber concert, I'm not convinced that that would really be the best way.
Yeah, no, you're right, though, because it depends on the demographics. I know my kind of age range, it was, I just, as an example, I remember seeing Steph Houghton, and she was the first one female football player I can really remember seeing on the telly. But also, she was from the Northeast. And I remember saying, if she's from the Northeast and she can make it, maybe I can do something, and she was representation even for, a really small mining town in the Northeast. So when you look at the people who didn't have that growing up, and now, I can follow along with my favorite teams, I can go to a match, it's so easily accessible. It's not just making sure the next generation are taken care of, but it's also making sure that the generations that didn't have this for so many years, that they're also being taken care of and catered for as well. Because I feel like a lot of time things are catered towards younger children. That's fantastic. But there's also a lot of fans that, would love to get a player's signature. Not that we go to football games for signatures, just put it out there, but if we can, because they followed them for so long and probably followed them for their whole career, and it means so much. But you've got other people saying, adults need to move aside for the children. And it's finding that balance. And I think that's where some clubs do it really well, and some fan bases do it really well. But it's just about making sure we keep that safe, fun banter and not let that toxicity come into it, because I think a lot of accounts, especially on Twitter, really take it to the extremes, and that's not who we are. It's not who the real fans are and who they represent. But unfortunately, it's a certain type of person that does scream loudest. So I think as a community, as the proper fans, we need to kind of make sure that those boundaries and those rules are laid out and say, right, this is what women's football is, and we need to work together to make sure it stays that way.
No, absolutely. And there is a generational thing to be said here. I mean, Michael makes an interesting point where he says, these are men who've grown up with Lad Mags, Jeremy Clarkson and Andrew Tate, good luck selling women's sports for that lot.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's my generation too, Michael. I can distinctly remember walking through the newsagents, and that's all you would see is Loaded, Nuts, Zoo, like FHM, all of those things were that. And you only got to look at Soccer AM, what that was like. Like Soccer AM, a woman being on Soccer AM was only to be a ladette. And her job would be to stand at the door. She'd walk up and down as if she was on a catwalk. And then there'd be loads of lewd jokes basically made at her expense. And they'd be quite happy being there. And that was the level of football TV 20 years ago. As far back as then. It's as simple as that. And we are in a situation where you are trying to get these people to now understand that these women that have enjoyed football were not just there to be stared at. They were not just there to be there for the men. They were actually there because they enjoy football. And we've hit this massive crossover now where there's still a large proportion, I think, of men, Rob, who are just still interested in, well, they're just women, they're nothing to do with football. They can't possibly have a decent opinion on football whatsoever. So... if that's the case, why are we, or are we aiming it at them, or are we just finding that they're seeing what it is that's there and that's on offer, and because it annoys them, they feel like they have something to say about it?
I think my honest point on it and my honest sort of view on it is that almost the generation, and then again, but my own personal generation, I think there will be some people that will ultimately that will adopt it and will embrace it, and there will be some that won't. I think it's really of the next generation is where you do need to target it, and I think that partly that does mean getting the buy-in of parents, of older grandparents, etc., who I think are more likely to be more tolerant. I mean, this is my concern. And this is a really good point. I think my big concern is that this goes the way of the Premier League and gets horrendously commercialised. Now, one of my biggest sort of gripes in generally is the amount of commercialisation of the Premier League, and the fact nowadays it's there's as much football analysis, natural analysis as analysing spending habits, or analysing that X has been spent Y, or that they've bought so many players, or the manager's been there for 3 weeks. How come they aren't all suddenly playing like 1970 Brazil, and this ridiculous sort of immediate churn and pressure? My concern with Nuco, especially for the WSL, is that that's the way. I think there's two ways that I go. Number one, I think they're equally dystopian. Number one is it gets stupidly commercialised, prices start going up, and ultimately, while you're still growing the fan base and building that development and building that core basis, you lose that. I mean, again, obviously, Barry, assuming your age, I'm not necessarily sure you were alive at this point, but my dad talks about sort of football in the 70s and 80s when hooliganism nearly ruined it. And, were sort of, again, I think you're probably that's slightly before your time, but my dad talks about sort of hooliganism in the 70s and 80s and says that pretty much it made it impossible to go to games for a long time because of the fact you were effectively going for an organised punch-up. Now, I don't think women's football is going to go that way, but I think it's going to get commercialised to the point that you'll go to everything and suddenly everything will be a sale opportunity or an advertising opportunity, and it will just be, a case of like, buy the kits for X amount of money, corners sponsored by A, throw-in sponsored by B, and just one endless line of commercialisation rather than the actual sport. And that's the way I think the Premier League going. The other scenario, and this is the other one I equally don't want, is you get to a point where a team is so dominant that they're able to sort of, monopolise that domination, and then really there isn't any level of competition. And I do, I'll be brutally honest, the Chelsea, and I like, winning the leagues, I like that. But I do worry we are getting to a point at the moment, and this is a challenge to everyone else in the league, where Chelsea are getting to a stage where almost they can, they have the resources, they have the backing internally, and there are other clubs, this is a challenge to the likes of your City, Arsenal, Manchester United. You have the funds, you have the money, you have the clout to do it. You can easily go out and buy, I saw people criticising, saying, why are Chelsea buying Kira Walsh in January? She was, a price, I think, for a world-class player that, there's no reason United couldn't have put that money down and persuade. I don't know about persuading her. That's the way. Arsenal put twice that money down in the summer. Manchester City, the wages they're paying Carolyn are significant. They could have, transferred some of that across. And what I don't want is, a situation where almost the women's game suffers because there's no competition at the beginning of the season. Then we're just saying, well, Chelsea are only not going to win it if something catastrophic happens. And that's my big concern.
No, absolutely. And I suppose, if we sort of press on from that one as well, it comes down to punditry as well. And that was one of the ones that once they realised they couldn't win the argument on being able to change the channel because that was, too much effort for them to do, they immediately started saying that, and there were some of the words that we used, yes, but why are the women invading our game? Why are they doing this? Why are they finding their way onto and they started talking about pundits. And of course, there was one pundit that was named above all others, Saint Enia Valuco, and that's who they would bring up. And immediately I'd say, well, what about Michael Owen? What about Steve McManaman? What about Lee Dixon? There's some atrocious people that are pundits that are men. Why are you not bothered about them? Oh, well, they played the game. Well, I mean, the women have played the game. Enia Valuco's played the game. She may not have played it for men, but that's because she's not a bloke. She still understands it. Football is football. Take the round thing, stick it in that net. Everybody still works the same way. There's still defenders to get against. You've still got to get past the midfield. You still need to be able to decide who's using the flanks or going down the middle. It's the same thing. But despite that, apparently women aren't allowed to have an opinion. So the minute you have Enia Valuco on there, that's game over. And even Jeff Stelling's weighed in on this one. I think it was Jeff Stelling. I don't want to misquote him, but saying he's quite happy for them. It was Des Lynam. Oh, thank God. Sorry, Jeff. Des Lynam saying that he had no problem with women presenters, but women pundits shouldn't be in the males' game. And the thing they would then throw out is the women can be pundits in the men's game, but there's not any men's pundits in the women's game. And when you look at the WSL, to be fair, it is mostly women pundits. Now, I'd just like to know your opinion on that one. I'm not even going to try and bias that one with what I'm saying. I'm just very intrigued as to what both of you ladies are going to say about that. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always want to have, especially in punditry where it's so opinion-based and there's so many people with different opinions on our TV screens, I think you want to have as broad a spectrum as possible. So I think it's important to have both men and women there. And I think that's both in the men's and the women's game. I think I'd love to see more men in the female punditry. No, more men in punditry in the women's game and more women in punditry in the men's game. I think that that's super important to give opportunities in both and to just increase the range of different opinions. And therefore that can often make it more interesting to watch.
I mean, what do you think about when people call it a tick box exercise? Because that's the thing that gets said. I mean, they were talking about Soccer Saturday. Nobody's watching Soccer Saturday anymore, and that's because Jeff Stelling's left, and so therefore it's not even remotely as exciting as it used to be. That man carried that show even when everybody else was on it, and the minute he left, you were never going to get it. It was never going to be. You didn't matter who you put on. It was never going to have the same level that Jeff Stelling would bring to that. But when they start talking about, you know, women pundits being on there, it's a case, isn't it, of seeing it. And it's that whole thing of if you see it, you can be it. They talk about box ticking. They talk about it's all woke agendas. You've got to have a black person on there. There's got to be a woman on there. And I don't think they're fully understanding. And maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm going too much the other way on this. But surely it's about understanding that it's not just men or boys that grow up to become men. It's about women being able to see themselves in spaces, which is something we used to do with the children all the time, is to say, draw me a doctor, draw me a firefighter, and you deliberately use the right language. And 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, they draw you a man as a doctor, a woman as a nurse, a man as a firefighter, because they think about gender roles and what gender norms in terms of how they've been put out there. So do you think there's an element there of, yes, we do need to have box ticking, and that actually, if they're not necessarily the greatest of pundits, do you not think it's maybe because they're still learning and getting into being a pundit because they've not been given this opportunity before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to ultimately start as a box ticking exercise, just so that you can get the representation up to a point. And then it becomes like more people see it, more people want to be it, that kind of thing. And it grows, and then it's no longer a box ticking exercise, it's just the norm. But exactly like you said, like when I was growing up, there was no representation. And I remember around the age of 9, genuinely believing that if I wanted to be a professional footballer, I'd have to be the first woman to ever play in the Premier League, because I just didn't see any representation of the women's game at all. I just didn't see it. So therefore, I didn't necessarily believe that it was possible for me. So I really feel like we need to increase that representation, and whether that's in punditry, commentary, on the pitch, off the pitch, whatever it is, there needs to be at least a certain level of representation across the board, so that people growing up can feel like they can achieve whatever it is that they want to do. And it is possible for a girl or a guy or whatever to do what they want to do.
Absolutely. This, I'm going to try and find a picture that I want to finish everything with when we get to it, that I will throw up on the screen, but I'm going to have to go and do a bit of jiggery pokery on the internet to find that picture. So whilst I'm doing that, Freya, can you, for you as well, you know, I mean, you've moved into the journalism side of things, you know, you do a bit of writing, you do those types of things, but it's got to be about that. It's got to be about youngsters seeing that it is something they can do. We've got young girls now that are dreaming of there could be a career in football. It just wasn't happening 10 years ago. You know, that would have just been a hobby, but now they actually think they can. So why would you not want to give them the opportunity to do that? Michael, stop it. That's an all for United chat. That was. Why would you not want to give women also the opportunity to see it? They could be presenters, they can be journalists, they can do all of these things.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And I think, unfortunately, in men's football, it still very much feels like an all boys club. Like you have to be from, you know, a certain team, play of a certain, like you to have that street cred almost, to be like, oh yeah, he knows what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. And when you're talking about the tick boxes, it's very much aware for most people. As soon as you see, oh, it's a tick box, you're like, oh, right, you're that type of person, okay. Because they can't see beyond that. They can't see potential. They can't see talent or anything like that. They purely think this person is in that space because they've been pushed there, because they've had to be there, because, you know, people, you know, they've been forced upon it, back to that language again. But in the women's game, it's very much, if you come across and you're on Punditry or you're presenting and you know about the game, no one bats an eyelid. We just say, okay, you know, show us what you can do. Whereas I think in the men's game, it's almost as if you want to be in that space, you've got to prove that you know more facts than anyone else, that you know, that you've almost got to work 10, 20 times harder to be accepted, or at least acknowledged in that space, rather than someone who, as we've said, there's some men who are terrible on punditry, but because they're a certain player or a certain name, they're getting away with it because it's them. And it's almost as if, you know, the credit that the women get, like Alex Scott, for example, you know, being a lioness, playing at the top of her game for so many years, getting so many capped goals, etc., it's almost as if that doesn't count. And it's like, how can you take all that away from her? You know, she went back to university, didn't she? And she got, you know, she had experience in broadcasting, and she did it, you know, more than most in the men's game as well. And you just think, give people the chance that they require. If they're crap, they're crap. That's absolutely fine. But you've given them the chance to do that. But the majority of people can't even get a foot in the door because they don't even know that door's there. So yeah, we just need people to know that they can.
No, I tend to agree. Time is, I mean, we could probably go on for about 7 hours about this particular thing. All of us will need our beauty sleep, or maybe certainly me and Rob will need our beauty sleep. But I'm going to ask some very simple, quick fire questions for you all. They reckon that men are subsidising the sport and that all the money is coming from the men's football teams. Rob, how would you deflect that particular argument? Is that true? Are all the men subsidising the sport for the women? And is that something actually that should happen? Or should they just be made immediately to stand on their own 2 feet without any help from the same people that stopped them playing in the first place?
Yeah, it's either which is a one club mentality. It's all the same thing. You know, its success is shared across both of them, and therefore you have to share it. At the end of the day, the money you're talking about in women's football and how much it costs from an operational point of view, especially for Premier League clubs, I do have more sympathy down the pyramid, especially when you have situations where teams don't necessarily have parent, you know, Premier League or Championship clubs they can rely on. I have more sympathy from the fiscal point of view. But for Premier League clubs to complain about it, get over yourself. You know, every single Premier League club, I guarantee, has probably spent more operational cost-wise on buying a centre-back that didn't work out in the last couple of years. You know, you know, Chelsea-wise, some of the signings that we've made, even, you know, that haven't even appeared yet for the senior side, that could, you know, fund the women's team for years. So, quite frankly, that argument is null and void. If you're further down the pyramid, I have more sympathy, but at the end of the day, the operational costs then are even lower than they are for the WSL. You don't have the same requirements. It is not difficult. Again, as someone else also points out, some of the clubs make profit, and some of them are, you know, are fiscally stable and are making profit. So it's just a complete utter straw man argument.
Absolutely. Freya, one club mentalities are too confusing. Manchester United women are not the same as Manchester United men. They're effectively two different clubs. So why are we doing that?
When the one club mentality is done correctly, I love it, because if you support a team, you support the men's and the women's. I just don't understand why they have to be separate. Surely, if you support a club, you support the club, right? Doesn't matter if they're the youth teams, the women's, the men's, the walking football team. Like, it doesn't matter. They're literally all the same. And the men's, the amount of money, like you said, just kind of keep it brief. There is so much money that could be even just little bits into the women's game to promote it and make it bigger. So like Rob was saying, those gaps aren't as huge between the top and even the middle of the table. So there's so much money and so much promise and support that the male side of the club can give. But we need to see more unity. We need to see more of that in the future.
I see, look at that. I was actually unmuted. I could have carried on talking. My jiggery poker is not working as well as I'd like it to. B, people didn't pay for women's football when they subscribed. My £40 that I'm spending on Sky Sports should only be going to men's footballers. It shouldn't be going to women's footballers. Or apparently, no problem though with it going to the NFL or netball or Quidditch or anything else that seems to be being shown on there. But women's football should not be getting any money from Sky Sports. This isn't what I paid for 20 years ago.
I mean, seeing as the game was banned for as long as it was, it should get all the support it deserves. 50 years we weren't allowed to play it. We should be getting more support than we currently are. I think, like you said, the Sky Sports, for example, you get everything with it, whether that's men's football, women's football, cricket, tennis. It all comes together. And if you don't want to watch it, you don't have to watch it. Like, it's a stupid argument.
I would agree. I think it is the most stupid argument out of all of it. Like, exactly this. There's not much going on at all. It's absolutely stupid. I was going to ask you this question, Rob, but I'm not. I'm going to ask the two ladies this one. Are you sexist if you don't like women's football, Freya?
No. It just means you don't like women's football. If you don't like it for the right reasons, let's just make that clear. If you don't like it because you've tried it, you've watched it, it's not for you, fine. But if you like it for all of those horrendous, if you don't like it, sorry, for all those horrendous reasons, then yes, it does.
Dee, are you sexist if you don't like women's football?
I mean, I completely agree with Freya. You don't have to like football. Like I said, they're two different games, the men's and the women's. I don't particularly enjoy watching the men's game. That doesn't make me sexist. I just prefer the women's. So, yeah, I completely agree with Freya.
Okay. Rob, I'm going to throw you this one. If it was such a good sport, all the women would go and watch it. Why don't more women watch women's football? Why aren't they packing out the stadiums?
That's just
just remember, it's not me asking these questions.
Yeah, no, I know. That's just I'm going to struggle to deign that of a proper response. Go actually look at the demographic that attends a game. You know, if you really want to do an FOI to a club, I'm sure they'll give you the information on it. Like it predominantly is. I'm not really sure what they're. It's rare I'm speechless, but that argument is one of the most stupid I've heard. One thing I will say that I want to just have a criticism with the FA in general about women's football, because it wouldn't be me on the show about slating at least one of the organisational bodies. The Conti Cup final is between Chelsea and Manchester City. 23,000 tickets have gone on open sale to the public. 5,000 have gone to each team. Now, I am all for people coming along to games as a neutral and getting involved in teams, not cup finals. Cup finals should be for the fans. And firstly, I'm not sure why there's such a whacking great corporate, allowance. I've heard anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000, which inevitably won't be full. I saw it a couple of years ago, and the entire corporate section was empty. Secondly, I don't get this concept of, constant neutral fans are trying to sell tickets. Like, I guarantee you, if you put those tickets up for, Chelsea, Manchester City, they would sell, 15,000 is an easy sell. Both of them are selling that regularly when they have home games at, Stamford Bridge or at the Etihad for big Champions League matches. I find it hard to believe they wouldn't do it for a cup final, especially one that, while it's in Derby, it's, it's not easy for Chelsea necessarily to get to. It's not as hard for Manchester City to get to. And both sides, I speak about Manchester City, but certainly on the Chelsea side of things, I know a lot of fans at the moment are turning to the women's team as a more interesting situation and something that are actually, it's enjoyable football to watch, because at times the men's team is mind-numbingly boring. And, I consider us quite lucky in that I followed Chelsea women for a long, long time. But there's a lot of people nowadays that are now messaging me and are saying this, and they're saying, I tuned into Chelsea women, and they play really attractive, quick passing football. And I was like, yes, congratulations. This is why they've been so dominant for such a while, and why they are such a good thing, and why I've badgered on and said for such a long time. I mean, there you go. Yeah, look at that. The game in Bristol sold out. I mean, look at this. It's the sort of things like that irritate me, where situations, the FA almost themselves need to look back and acknowledge things are growing, and rather than keep trying to market things to the neutral and trying to build it, market it to the fans, build up the fan bases and support the fan bases.
I tend to agree with that. Freya, yes, of course, they do get lots of high attendances. They give out so many freebies for tickets.
Yeah, and it depends who the freebies are for. If they're for your local football teams, if they're for your local schools, if they're, the free tickets for the right reasons, brilliant, fine. But like Rob said, that tiny allocation for a cup final. No, you need to expand it out and have the neutral tickets as a smaller percentage, because you need that rivalry. You need to build up these fan bases, especially particular teams, as we probably know about on the pods. It's very hard to get vocal fans of certain teams because they haven't got that base yet, that support. So, build your fan bases up first, and it's those fans that, will be shouting the loudest and will attend as many games as they can.
Beatrice, I'm going to ask you this question first, and it's my penultimate question of the evening. I'm going to ask you first, and it is a loaded question because you're a player, and that's why I've come to you first on this one. Women ruin it when they ask for equal pay with the men. Do you think that women should be, at this moment in time, on equal pay with the men?
I mean, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? that would be nice. I think if the women's game got to a point where we were getting the silly money that the men was, it would kind of ruin the game. It would become super commercialized, like Rob was saying earlier. I think the men's money is ridiculous, and equal pay is probably unrealistic. I think it would just be nice to be able to make a living out of it, to get to a point where not just the top few players are making a decent amount. Like, I saw some crazy statistics comparing like the Lionesses' salaries with the England men's. Like, it's scary how little the women are earning and how much the men are earning. I think there should be a nice middle ground there, because the men's money is silly, but the women's is also silly in the other extreme. So yeah, I think equal pay would be the dream, but for me, like, I'd just like there to be more money the whole way down the pyramid, so that you get like a tier 4 team who are able to cover the cost of the petrol it cost the player to get to the ground. That would be a great start.
I mean, it's an interesting one, Freya. I'll throw it over to you now, but fair pay is what JJ says. I think I tend to agree with that. Emma saying women in any job want equal pay with the men. It's not just in football. Yes, it's not exactly silly money, but we still want equal anyway. Now, I actually go back to the tennis on this one. And if there's ever going to be a statement that I say that is likely to get clips and thrown out on the internet as what a terrible man I am, this is going to be it. I do get a little bit upset at the women in the tennis, because they're getting paid the exact same for 3 sets, and the men have to go on and play 5. So I'd like to see everybody playing 3 sets. I think that would be a better way. Plus, it would stop us watching matches that go on for about 7 hours when we end up with 5-set thrillers, and then EastEnders gets moved out of the way. Nobody wants EastEnders to get moved. Keep EastEnders on BBC One. I used to hate to tape it, and then Tim Henman's like, I've watched this match already. I just deliberately taping EastEnders. Why have you not done that? So, but it's not a wrong thing here, is it? It's not then. Yeah, exactly. And I would agree with that too. Either way, I think that would be a sensible thing to do. But Freya, for you, where do you stand on this one? Because it's right. The money's not there at the moment, is it? And yes, it's in grandstands. It's not there at the moment. But like we talked about the Lionesses there, they are selling out Wembley. So if they're selling out Wembley, I don't know, the ticket prices are probably a little bit different, but there should probably be a little bit more money going to the women, shouldn't there?
Yeah, there should be. And like we said, it's not equal pay because, as everyone said, the money in the men's game is just ridiculous, isn't it? But that's a different podcast. But just a fair wage, like a living wage, would be quite nice. Especially, you get to tier 3, 4, 5, you want players to be able to be full-time professionals, to be able to just focus solely on their game, because at the end of the day, that's where our next generations of players, they come through the pyramid. Like, they need the time, they need the contact time, they need, the professionals around them to help them develop as well. And you just think, how's that going to come through when in the men's side of it, you've got, the youngsters being scouted for academies and they get the taxis paid for and, the travel and stuff. But you just think it just needs to be fairer. Like, yes, the money is not there yet to throw hundreds of thousands. We're not asking for that, but we're just asking to have a decent living, affordable wage. That's it. And I don't think that's much to ask when you've got clubs making millions.
don't think anyone should be paid in hundreds and thousands. They're just piddly little things at the best of times. Best on capes, those. Rob, for you, last say on equal pay. What do you reckon?
I mean, my view, yeah, men's football salaries are absurd, and there needs to be a cap on that. Women's football salaries need to increase. I think, yeah, a livable wage is the way forward. My controversial view that I've had, and I've had this for a long time, is that players shouldn't get paid for representing their country in anything. Representing the country should be a state of pride anyway, and I've viewed that across all sports. That's been my view. I think it's the ultimate honour to represent the country. But that's, the case in everything. And I see, the argument that people make nowadays of Olympians being paid and stuff like that, and that now coming into it. I understand why it needs to be the case. I think I have a utopian view on it. But yeah, I think people moaning about like pay and stuff, again, it's just one of those silly, arguments people make because they hear, so-and-so parrots out and they parrot out a statistic. And in reality, they haven't got a clue what the women are being paid. But, they just don't like the idea of women's football or the idea of women's sport in general.
Absolutely that. That pretty much concludes the main part of what we're going to talk about. But I do have one slightly different question, and it comes from a situation, like I say, from the situation that happened a few days ago, and what started this entire conversation, because it was a very interesting thing. We saw Connor, as the owner of the channel, he had quite a bit of pushback simply for retweeting what Alan Brazil had said and then putting a clapping emoji next to Shaban's name. And it was ridiculous. He got just the most horrendous amount of abuse that I think I've ever seen volleyed at someone. And I've taken the mickey out of his hair and his burger eating. And so I did really imagine that he wouldn't quite end up getting what he got. I got a reasonable amount. I had my sexuality questioned. I had my motives questioned. I had all sorts of things questioned on there. And I can honestly tell you, it genuinely didn't bother me. I was talking to a friend of mine at the football on Sunday, and I was showing him some of my replies. And he said, I can just imagine you sat on your sofa just giggling as you was putting these responses across. And I absolutely was. I was honest. I had the time of my life sending back these responses to some of these people who genuinely believed they were getting under people's skins. Not everybody is necessarily going to have that thick skin. Freya, why do you think people abuse other people purely for standing up for a sport? And it wasn't even like, it's not even an aggressive comment to have made. Why do you think there are still people whose default setting isn't a conversation, it's just abuse?
I don't think there's any reasoning with those kind of people, because you can guarantee if they're actual real, they will have a player as their profile picture or something, cartoony. It won't be their real name in their handle. It'll be a player name with the club they apparently support. And these are the people who just hate everything. If you say something different, they will hate you for it. And I think it's got to the point where, unfortunately, someone mentioned the politics earlier, in the political landscape we're currently in, there's a lot of hatred. And it's so much easier to hate someone than to find an agreement with them. And as soon as someone says anything that they disagree with, then it's just a pile on. And unfortunately, Twitter is a cesspit, and it feels like you're screaming into the abyss a lot of the time. And there are people who will say the most horrendously horrible things because they're anonymous, because it's online, because it doesn't mean anything to them. However, people like us that have got real profiles, real people, real opinions, sometimes we shouldn't have to, but sometimes we have to think twice, because is it worth the hate we're going to get back for putting it out there? But people like that went on at you and went on at Connor, like I was reading through the comments, I couldn't believe it. But they will just hate everyone because they can. And that's the sad state of it. There's no reason behind it.
No, there is no reasoning with it, but there certainly is messing with it. And like I say, there are a lot of people that won't necessarily have that strength of character to be able to sit there and just poke fun back at these people. But yeah, like I say, lots of people that I spoke to genuinely enjoyed the Twitter exchanges. I particularly favourite one was mentioning how I have never walked past a Dorothy Perkins and felt like I needed to jump in and tell them what a waste of space
I like that one.
like just go past it. And then yeah, but it's its own space, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, but so Sky Sports Football, like that's literally where it belongs. Like, get a grip. Come on, seriously. Last thing I wanted to show you is this, and it's going to cover all of you, so I'm sorry about that. Me too, but you can hear our voices. And it was this. And everybody keeps on talking about equality, and I just wanted to throw this out there for anybody who might be sort of wondering what the drama is. If you just give equality, you're giving everybody the same box. Now you can see that's me over there on the right hand side in the purple top, just fully unable to see over a fence. I'm joking. That's women's football. All right. Men's football is in the blue shirt. I'm not entirely sure what's in the red shirt, so we'll ignore that for now. But when you look at it, you give equality, all you're doing is giving people exactly the same thing. When you give them equity, which is what this extra exposure is, men's football doesn't need it. It's sustained, it's there, it's ready, it knows what's going on. It doesn't need a box to stand on. It's set up, it's established. And women's football is not. So there it is, under the equity part, being given those extra boxes to give it the ability to be seen. The reality is, as you see on that one, you don't even see the Premier League footballers because there's just all those boxes and they're still on top of that because they're getting paid so much money. The WSL stuck in the ground. They haven't even been given a box. They've had an area cut out beneath them that 50 years of not having football being played is there. The reality is the liberation is just getting rid of all of it. If you get rid of the fence entirely, you end up being in a situation where you don't have to worry about it and everybody can just enjoy watching football. And surely, ultimately, that is what we really wanted. It's not about equality. It's about just giving people the opportunity that everybody else gets. And the way to do that is to ensure that people have that equity, that ability to access everything else that everyone else can access. I'll finish by saying the only time I've ever got truly emotional, that's the second time, in education was going to a special school. It was a school that I wasn't expecting to go to. And the school that I was in, I was there for 2 days. And there was one young boy who was wheeled in on a hospital trolley. He was going to school, but he wasn't expected to last 2 weeks of being alive. But they were still just trying to give him the same sort of experience that everyone else would have. They had Leona Lewis's song Run on. I can't even listen to that nowadays without having a little tear. Because even at that point, it was still just giving people the opportunity to be people. And I think from my point of view, I'd just like to throw it out there. Just let people be people. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to go out there and try and cause all these dramas for other people. I just don't think it's that necessary. You just need to chill out. If it's not for you, it's not for you. Stop getting yourself so upset over things that really big. Like, it's a bunch. What was it the people that didn't like men's football used to say? It's just 22 people chasing a ball and sticking it in a goal. And that's all it is. Same things happening. Guys, it's been a real pleasure to have all of you on. B, excellent to have you on, but whereabouts could people see more? Because I know that you're a budding YouTuber at the moment and TikTok. There's so many things that you're throwing out there. If people wanted to get accosted outside the Emirates by you, how could they find out when they're going to get that?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me across most social media channels at Beatrice Rogers _, posting a lot of women's football content mainly. And yeah, like you said, I'm also down at some of the WSL games at the moment, trying to interview people, grow my experience, because as well as football, I'm an aspiring sports presenter, so would appreciate the support.
There we go. Absolutely. And you might be lucky at seeing Beatrice even more on all women's football, which would be absolutely superb if we could get her on more there. Equally, Rob, lovely to have you here. Where could people find your inane ramblings about the WSL?
At journalism_RP on X. And again, I'm going back to Blue Sky now. The window's closed again. While the window was open, it was relevant to be there. But now that people have started ranting again, back to Blue Sky, which is RJP journalism.
There we go. And Freya, thank you again for joining us as well. Anything you'd like to shout out at the end there as well?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm across all socials at T4T Rights, or I'm writing much more now for my company, The Whole 115 Yards. So give that a shout if you can, please.
Super duper. Well, there you go. Listen, it's been a slightly longer show, but I think a really relevant show. We could have gone on for hours with this one. Genuinely, I think we could have done this one to death. If ever there was going to be a subject for a 24-hour videothon, this is probably the one. But not today. It's a Monday, don't you know? We've all got a week at work, and we're very much looking forward to getting on with it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your sensibility within the comments. And thank you to you guys who've been here with us this evening. We're looking forward to next week. Hopefully we'll be back. And Wednesday, lower league lingo. We're doing tier 5. A few things to talk about there. So get yourself on that and a little bit about the FA Cup. So we'll see you on Wednesday. Night all.